Matt Hardigree, Jalopnik, and then all these other things now for
Gizmodo.
Gizmodo. If you could describe this dinner with racers in one word, what would it be?
A mistake.
Fair enough.
And now for Dinner with Racers, presented by
Continental Tire.
with your hosts, Ryan Eversley and Sean Heckman.
Placeholder radio sound. I'm a driver. I'm very angry. This is the sound of a driver on the radio during a race.
What do you think I should order?
Welcome to Dinner with Racers. I'm your host, Ryan Eversley, alongside the other host, Sean Heckman.
Other host.
And we just got done with this crazy road trip. We're actually on our way to LAX right now to drop me off so I can finally go home after being trapped in Sean's basement for the last 6 years, it seems like.
I'm surprised you got the chains off.
And we along our 12,000-mile journey in our what kind of car?
Oh, the Honda Odyssey.
That's right.
What were the tires?
Continental Tire.
Oh, the cross-continent LX20s.
And so we ended up, 29 states, 12,000 miles, 6 million calories at least,
Easily.
and type 2 diabetes.
Yep.
And we found ourselves in New York City on a Friday afternoon, mad rush to get there. I end up having to run 3 blocks to get a box of pizza and a chicken sandwich, and make it back to the headquarters for Jalopnik, which is in Manhattan.
So we interviewed Matt Hardigree. Now, Jalopnik was a keen place we wanted to go to and interview Matt, who's become kind of an instrumental part of all of that group, but especially Jalopnik. Jalopnik, for those who don't know, is more of a car culture website than it is specifically motorsports. That's actually why we wanted to talk to them.
If you know who we are and you don't know who Jalopnik
Yeah,
is, this is not happening.
So Jalopnik, I believe, has a very unique take on kind of the car culture. They've obviously done a great job of captivating the car culture.
Yeah.
And if there's one thing that motorsports is struggling with, it's that conversion of the young car culture being converted over to motorsports. And so I thought with the way Jalopnik is able to gauge readers, we'd be able to sort of get their take on it. And believe it or not, the Jalopnik readership count within the motorsports realm is probably higher than any of the other motorsport outlets.
Yeah, pretty crazy when you think about it, considering that's not even like their specialty. So we sat down with Matt. We had a cool couple of conversations while he had the free time for us. One of which I really enjoyed was the celebrity encounter.
We talk about how he lied his way into his job. And we also kind of wrap it up with what he would do to help fix motorsports, which I think is something we would both agree with.
Yeah, I thought he was pretty spot on.
So, anyway, Matt Hardigree. Take it away, Biff.
Shout out to Michael Balaban, who couldn't be there, but I love your beard.
All right, we're going to start in 5, 4, 3, 2.
So, it doesn't matter. You would have ended up here
Yeah,
at
either
this
way, we're
time,
going to get
no matter
stuck.
what.
Exactly. So, he'll be here in a minute, but
No
so
rush.
you're already tanked.
I tanked is an overstatement. I've had a couple beers.
A couple of beers.
So I'm very lightly buzzed.
Okay.
It's more the emotional feeling.
Sure.
I'm I've had a little bit to drink, but I'm just mostly I'm very excited for my friend and
Sure.
a little sad that they
Well,
won't
'cause
work with me anymore.
It's been a trying time for the company as a whole, but you've had a long time, 3.5 years, kind of partner in the company.
I've been here for 9 years, and this person's been
you're-
here for about 3.5
Right.
years. Yeah.
So you wake up, you come into the office, and there's an email saying, "I'm quitting."
Yeah.
Nice. And so off to the bar you went.
Yeah, which is reasonable. The funny thing is there used to be a bar that we called Fantastico, and I don't know why we call it Fantastico because that's not the name of the bar.
Right.
But anytime anything went down, people would just say Fantastico, and it was just
And you just knew.
You just knew to go to
Yeah.
the specific bar, and the bar was actually not a bar; it was a Chinese restaurant, but it had a small bar in front of it.
Okay.
And so with very little, it was a very narrow bar, and so we would go to Fantastico.
Right.
And
It's probably one of those small places that sort of became yours on an occasion.
Exactly.
Like that. Yeah,
and we had such a period of bad news for a year.
Right.
Because unbeknownst to us, it
for
was
the last 18 months or so.
Right, yeah, about 18 months. But we didn't know for a year. We didn't know at this point that there was a billionaire trying to destroy us. So all of these bad things would happen, and it was this sort of Job. Not like we were Job, not like we were perfect, but this sort of Jobian thing where you're well, this week another crazy thing happened. And so we would just go there, and I felt bad because our offices were in Soho,
Yeah.
and so this place was like around the corner. So we would just go. So if like we were walking by, you would think it was like the most popular restaurant in New York because it would be like
This
500
flew
people,
of, like hipsters standing
like,
outside of it.
Yeah, outside, inside, like it was packed. And then you would like look back into the actual restaurant itself, and there'd be like 3 people. And we would go through like
Right.
I would guess I didn't, it wasn't on my corporate card usually, but like
Sure.
like $2,000 or $3,000 or $4,000 at a time, and
Right.
in Tsingtaos and like shots,
Right.
because very rarely did anyone actually order food.
Right.
And so I was like, I was worried that this place, the people thought that this was like a sustainable business. And so they were like, hey, we got a great thing going. Let's order 50 cases
Right,
of beer. And
right.
then one day we moved offices up here into Union Square.
Right.
And they're just sitting on all of this beer, and
Right.
they're like, no one is showing up.
Right.
What happened?
Right.
And because our misfortune was their good fortune.
Right, exactly.
For like a year and a half.
Drown your sorrows here. So no, I understand. All right, well let's get into that actually. So we're here because you're with Jalopnik. Obviously, Jalopnik is sort of a new player in the motorsports and automotive industry on a relative scale. And so for what we're doing, we wanted to get to. I mean, you've obviously been a big proponent of all the kind of stuff we do, but it's been a trying time for Jalopnik as we're part of Gawker.
We were part of Gawker Media.
right.
Now we're part of what is called Gizmodo Media Group,
which was bought out by Univision.
Which was bought out by Univision.
Right.
So we're part of a much larger media company, which is good. And I think, honestly, a lot of this was inevitable. Like, inevitably, Gawker Media was going to become part of a larger media company and
Sure.
sold to private equity.
Sure.
Like, it was I think that what a lot of people who don't work in the internet world realize is that, with Facebook and social and all of this, like, it's not like you can just one day decide, hey, I'm going to start a new media company and it's going to be widely successful. Like, there were people who got in early enough, and early enough is the early to mid 2000s, maybe into the early 2010s.
In sort of the blog business, so to speak.
Right,
Yeah.
and they got in and they created a brand that was large enough and had a following that was large enough that when Facebook and other social media came in to sort of dictate who was able to read what and how
and
people
started creating a forum to post links for these exact kind of
yeah,
things.
exactly.
Right,
They were in early enough that they could exist. So if you try to
Yeah.
start a media company now, you have to somehow gain traction in this world that has largely been established.
And it's
So-
already it's already saturated.
Exactly, and so
yeah.
Gawker Media's properties are big in their spaces. Kotaku's big in video. If you like video games, you read Kotaku.
Right. There's
If you
Kotaku.
Deadspin for
Deadspin.
sports, Jezebel for women's issues and politics, and we have Lifehacker for productivity. Like, if you look for how do I do something on the internet,
Right.
how do I do this in a computer,
Right.
you're going to get a Lifehacker article,
Right.
just because it's been doing it for
Right.
10 years. And so we, and of course, obviously Gizmodo for tech, and
Right.
so we you have this existing thing. So it was inevitable that someone was going to realize that rather than try to build a new enterprise and spend an insane amount of money, someone's already done the work of building up an
Right, so
enterprise.
buy it out.
Ours was accelerated by a lawsuit and by a billionaire who tried to destroy us, and so there was we went bankrupt. We didn't go bankrupt because we lost money. We were actually profitable, but it was bankruptcy was the easiest way to deal with this these weird legal problems.
Right.
And so and Nick, who owned the company before, very consciously tried to said we need to end up in a place where the people who work here and the brands themselves can exist and be safe.
Right.
And the best way to do that is a sale. So we went to the bankruptcy court. Univision, who had been reportedly interested in buying us before, bought us out. I think they got a great deal for the company, and I think that it's exciting. Univision itself realizes that they work for their brand is largely a Hispanic audience, but they realize that even the Hispanic audience, Latino American audience wants stuff in English, and that's not what their brand is. And so they've created with Fusion their own brand, and they with buying the Onion or part of the Onion and buying the Root and a few other brands, and specifically Gizmodo Media, they're saying, hey, we're going to have a multicultural, largely urban, for the moment millennial, younger urban audience. How do we meet that? And they got Gawker Media, which is now Gizmodo Media, which serves that audience, and so it makes a lot of sense for them. And it makes sense for us. It makes sense for the brand. So it's a good place to end up in light of a literal existential threat where someone was trying to destroy us.
Well, so let's get into that a little bit. So again, we're more here to get to know who you are, but just sort of set the stage for those who don't entirely know. We're dealing with racing people, so maybe they've heard of the Hulk Hogan lawsuit. Maybe they know a little bit about how that relates to Gawker and what's gone on. But there's a whole backstory that we'll get into here. So basically, Gawker, which is sort of the parent group to Jalopnik, posted an article that featured clip of a sex tape on who we would know as Hulk Hogan. Filed a lawsuit on career damages and all kinds of stuff. And after months and months and months and months, basically a decision was upheld to pay, what was it, $140 million?
Yeah, it was $140 million on $100 million ask. Obviously, that's being appealed.
Of
mean,
course.
the backstory here is that I like people who don't know anything about this. I like you should just like search on Google what the original story is.
Right.
Because essentially, AJ Delario, who's being pursued by the courts or by like the specific person, wrote an article about Hulk Hogan who had sex with the wife of a guy who was a
swingers couple,
like a shock jock in Florida.
The love sponge.
Bubba the Love Sponge.
Bubba the Love Sponge.
Which is a thing I didn't know existed.
Yep.
Now know a lot about.
Extreme shock jock.
One of those, exactly. One of those guys. And the post itself is funny because it basically what the post is saying is someone sent us a sex tape. Like here's an extraordinarily short clip of it. It's only 6 seconds, I think, of actual sex.
Right.
But it's like grainy security camera footage.
How do we buzz Ryan in? I just got a text.
Oh, hold on a second.
Okay.
He can just buzz the front door and he'll.
Yeah, that's what he's trying to do. Oh, he made it.
All right.
All right, so much for that. Welcome.
I will take pizza from anywhere, by the way.
Yeah, no, I ran like halfway down the street.
There's Pizza Paradise around the corner, which Pizza Paradise is great because the pizza itself there is okay. It's fine.
Right.
Like most New York pizza is actually pretty good.
Right.
But there's a little Persian restaurant inside of it, and the Persian restaurant inside of the pizza place is amazing.
Nice.
But that's like a very New York thing.
But yeah, that's exclusively to what you guys do. But anyway, so all right, so where we were, he prints this he posts this article.
Yeah. So there was an article posted, and it was essentially. Sex tapes are boring. Like I think that people forget. If you go back in time, there were sex tapes posted like every week. Somebody had a sex tape.
Yeah, exactly.
And
Sean's got 3.
Yeah, Sean's got 3.
And I've been waiting for someone to download it, but no one's interested. So
it's hard. The market was saturated with sex tapes, and the post was essentially like media commentary. It was like sex tapes have become boring, and if you want further proof that like the sex lives of celebrities that you care about are not interesting, like Hulk Hogan for all his posturing about on Howard Stern or whatever about being like a great lover, like it's just like not interesting. And so like it was just a post about like it was literally the headline of the post was like don't watch this tape because it's like
it's just super
it's boring
monotonous.
and disappointing and none of this is like interesting. Little did we know that there was a billionaire who we had covered who had started a bunch of hedge funds and we'd written about.
Right.
And this is a guy who's supporting Donald Trump, who believes that the democracy in America got worse when women got the right to vote.
This is Peter Thiel.
Peter Thiel. Who's like obsessed with the blood of teenagers, like all this weird stuff, harvesting the blood of teenagers.
If you, we were looking up on him. So
Yeah,
basically, so I'm not worried about getting sued.
And there's all this stuff, and so like, and then, but he was like secretly financing. So like we were basically in a position where. Media companies get sued all the time. New York Times, Washington Post, any media company you think of gets sued.
Right.
If there's merit to it or it's too much of a nuisance, you got to close that door, right?
Oh, sorry, that's my bad.
If there's merit to it or it's just too much of a nuisance, they settle.
Right.
And like this happens all the time. I want to say like I would say every week, if not every day,
Right.
like these things are getting settled.
Well, so normally an article like that, you would assume he's just out for some settlement money or he gets whatever, and that would be the end of it. But where you discovered that maybe there was somebody behind the curtain, so to speak, on this whole thing.
Yeah.
Was some of the aggressive action they took when doing the filing.
Like they specifically got our insurance company out of it, which in most of these cases the insurance company pays for those insurance.
Well, normally you want the insurance company in because then you get paid.
Exactly.
Right.
So all this stuff happened, and there was a talk, and some people who were like, "Hey, I think like," and it sounds crazy to say. I will say this: after going through this experience. You would think the worst thing is thinking that there's a conspiracy to destroy you.
Right.
The worst thing is not thinking there's a conspiracy to destroy you. The worst thing is having it confirmed, and it turns out the person is a very well-connected billionaire.
Right. And he can outspend you until it basically ends.
And so like the appeals courts will ultimately decide this, and this will get worked out.
Right.
But the happy ending is that, like for most people, is that a very conscionable, thoughtful company bought Gawker Media, and now it's Gizmodo Media. And while Gawker is dead, and that is like Gawker, who's like the flagship site,
started the whole thing. Sure.
Yes, is gone, which is like troubling and sad, and a sign that like certain people in this country have more power than they should.
Right.
At the very least, most of the good work and everyone who worked at that site, they're at different sites doing good work, reporting on, whether it's, Facebook adjusting their algorithm, or, the issues with Tesla and self-driving that Jalopnik's reporting, or Deadspin with the NFL's response to domestic violence. Like, the good work that was being done that I think was, like it was a large company that posted, 300 articles a day or whatever.
Right.
Like there were good articles, there were terrible articles, and there was a lot in between.
Right.
And the best of that company continues on, which is nice.
Which is a good way to go. It kind of when I was reading all the stories behind what Peter Thiel and everybody sort of behind the scenes was trying to do, it brought up an interesting question that I thought about, because he's allegedly a supporter of some free press organizations. I don't know what's bullshit, what's not. But it brought up what I think might be a conflict between kind of modern journalism and more what we'd consider traditional journalism, where, Gawker is sort of the big namer or the big innovator in the very headline-grabbing, linkable articles that you can read, correct? Check this out. Well, you won't believe what this car is doing or whatever, versus something on a LA Times or, Wall Street Journal or whatever may not be so aggressive in their titling and their way of pursuing articles. I'm not saying right or wrong. I'm saying that traditional journalists or sort of older school press may resent a little bit of that. And I kind of wonder, is he part of that guard that's terrified of what you guys are doing?
Yeah, I mean, I think you think this is something separate, which is that there's a whole class of Silicon Valley media that exists to just say all technology is good, all new things are good. If a company gets a $3 billion valuation, because you have to understand that, like Silicon Valley, there are companies there that are transformative and do amazing things, and whose value is, if anything, underestimated in their ability to like transform society.
Sure.
And then there are companies like and like Apple or even Uber, like you look at these companies, or Tesla in some ways, like they do amazing things, and like it's very worthy of recognition. But Theranos is like a good example of Theranos being the company that said that they were able to like do all these amazing tests off a drop of blood, and the reality turns out that they weren't able to do any of it. And this woman goes from being the most valuable woman in the world, worth billions of dollars, worth nothing, because it turns out that they were selling a lie, because the idea of what they could do was far greater than the reality of what they could do.
Sure.
And the Silicon Valley press ultimately existed to like pump up this idea of and we see this all the time.
And you feel like you guys kind of exist to go bullshit.
To call. And sometimes we're wrong, and sometimes we're right, but at least to be able to say, as a corrective, to say we are going to be at least minimally skeptical of this. And this is where the roots of Jalopnik come from. Right. Because you had all of this automotive media in the early 2000s. I mean, let's not forget that the Motor Trend gave the Thunderbird Coupe as a supercharged vehicle, or as a turbocharged vehicle, the car of the year. Right. And then a year later, 2 years later, gave the turbocharged version of that same car the car of the year. And neither of those cars, in retrospect, are worthy. Like, I will say this as someone who owned a AmeriCore XR4 Ti. AmeriCore XR4 Ti was named, that I bought from Rutledge, was named, which is a whole other funny story, was named was a top 10 best by car and driver. Yeah. And I love that car very much, but in almost any year, it should not be a top 10 car.
Right.
And so you have this like world where it's just exists off press releases and exists off like this churn, and embargoes exist, and there's like very friendly handshaking between automakers and the automotive press, who rely exclusively on them almost in WeatherTech for advertising. WeatherTech's great. No disrespect to WeatherTech, but like,
we don't give it.
Obviously you guys don't, but like, whatever, like people put money in. And Jalopnik came across about to basically say, without access, because Jalopnik initially did not have access, without any kind of special favors from the automotive industry, like let's report on things not as people pretend them to be, but as they actually are.
So you saw a space to basically have zero commercial interest in talking about what you want to talk about.
Exactly. It was just like, we will point out that this car is bullshit. We will point out that like there's a marketing hype around something that doesn't matter, or isn't significant. And we will, for instance, like a great example, like I don't think any, like Chris Harris, who now is on Top Gear and is famous and is somewhat
Yeah.
untouchable, had an article about how Ferrari would like blatantly juke their press cars to give them more power.
Yeah.
And like if you were saying like, oh, I'm going to go to, you know, Silverstone and I'm going to drive a 458 and a 911 GT3 RS, or then it would have been a 458, you know, like a 360, whatever.
Sure.
430. And they would go, okay, fine, we'll bring you a car in 3 weeks. And they would take the car smartly, like, you know, I'm not a knock, like I'm actually kind of impressed. They would take a car then to, this is like a hypothetical example, take their car then to Silverstone, like dial it in for that track, make sure all the tires, make sure everything's right. And then their press car with 4 engineers would show up and somehow perform with 40 extra horsepower and somehow perform better. And so Chris Harris, being like an extremely smart and conscionable person, realized this and said, well, this is kind of bullshit. Let me write about this.
Yeah.
No one would publish that article.
Right.
Everyone refused.
So he
it.
wrote this freelance.
Yeah, he wrote a piece that was like, here's the reality of what's happening.
Right.
No one would print it.
Yeah.
Jalopnik, having like no relationship with Ferrari anyways, was just like, well, screw it. This is true.
Yeah.
Let's print a true thing.
Right.
And they did. And to this day, Jalopnik has had one Ferrari press car for one day, and it was a California team. And actually, I will say the people who run Ferrari now seem to be fairly chill and you know. But for like 4 years, longer than Chris Harris even, we were on the blacklist. But that's worth it. Like
Someone's got to call them on their bullshit.
if no one will, it's the easiest. Like people think like I don't want to pretend that like Jalopnik is like awesome and everyone is tough or whatever.
Sure,
It's like
sure.
people who worked for Jalopnik initially had like no access to the world. They weren't important. No one cared about
So he had
them.
nothing to lose.
There was nothing to lose.
Right.
And the only advantage is if Car and Driver, Motor Trend, Road and Track, Automobile, Car, if everyone was going to toe the company line and not step out, then the only way to compete with them with all of their money and all of their resources was just to step out and just to say the things like not as like we are principal journalists, but merely as this is our only competitive advantage we could possibly have. Being a bunch of dorky kids who love cars and love racing and love all this stuff was just to say, screw it. If this doesn't work out, I will just go back to my job at a bank or something.
Right.
And that was it. I actually don't know why you're talking to me. I'm the least important person you've ever spoken with.
Because this is a story that I don't even know the answer to. Like, I don't know how Matt Hardigree became the Jalopnik guy. I have no idea. And I talk to you all the time. So if I don't know, I imagine our listeners might not know.
Right.
And so it's important for us to not just cover race car drivers. Like we were talking about this on the drive here. We have more media people this year than actual drivers. Because we have ex-drivers that are now commentary and media. But the thought was like, oh, shit, we don't have that many drivers this year, but we want the story. We want to talk about the things that come out of that.
And Jalopnik has really, I would say, in the last 7 years, kind of forced its way into the automotive and motorsport space in a way that really didn't exist before that. And so you've kind of built your own niche, and obviously Ryan and I love that. And I would say the majority of people who are listening to podcasts are aware of that, but some may not be. But I don't think anybody really knows the story.
Okay, well let's go way back.
All right, kids, gather around.
Yeah, and instead of listening to this, go back to listen to Tommy Kendall because Tommy Kendall's hilarious.
He is the man. We love that guy.
I remember listening.
I'm shocked you've actually listened to these, by the way.
The first thing I said when he walked in, he's like, that level 5 episode.
The level 5 thing is the best thing I've ever heard.
Yeah, we literally were sitting there like, oh, we're done.
As he was telling it, we were just looking at each other like, oh,
we're done now.
Yeah,
we're out.
So Jalopnik, Gawker Media was like early on it was just Gizmodo, which was like a tech site, Wonket, which was a political site, and then Gawker itself, which was like sort of media gossip. And then there was like a little bit of money there, and all of a sudden Nick Denton, who founded the company, was like, hey, let's do something else. And he took Mike Spinelli aside, and they went, and I think it was him and maybe Lockhart Steele, who's another like old new media guy, and they were like, they got a few bottles of wine and maybe some food, and they had a whiteboard, and they were trying to like write down what should be and they wrote down a bunch of words like Beatnik and Jalopnik up there, and they had to try to explain to Nick why Motorhead could not be the name of the website.
I think we're gonna come into a problem with that.
He didn't know who Lemmy was. He could not they could not explain Motorhead would be a great name for a website, but it exists. It's a thing.
It's busy.
Right. Yeah.
So they liked Jalopnik and they liked Beatnik, and they combined the two. And so Jalopnik was formed. Mike Spinelli, who's amazing and is obviously he's got a great drive show and is over at the Drive and does awesome stuff. He was just like, okay, well, let's start talking about cars on the internet. And it was like very normal, and there wasn't anything exciting about it. And then he went to his first car show, And the weird thing about car shows is back in the day, there was this embargo system. And the embargo system said that basically every car magazine would abide by not releasing information about new cars until a certain date.
Okay.
This is what, 2005, 2006?
Yeah, this is 2006 mostly. And so Mike Spinelli would go to like auto shows where there would be cars on the floor that people were not allowed to write about to a certain date. But because no one knew who Mike Spinelli was or what Jalopnik was, he was free from these embargoes to write about them.
Yeah.
And so, and this a little, I would say also Mike Levine, who's now like a PR guy at Ford, who ran originally PickupTrucks.com, was in the same situation where they would just write about these things that were literally in front of them.
Right.
And it destroyed the automotive industry.
Absolutely.
The PR industry, like the PR and the news industry, they had no idea how to deal with this because they couldn't comprehend the idea
Of telling a guy,
yeah, that someone could just put something on the internet and then it would be news then. And so this like blew up the world and caused this whole cascading effect of, you know, people trying to abide by embargoes and people getting information, and it totally screwed up the whole very friendly like back padding industry that existed between automotive media, who wanted to keep getting money from automakers and wanted to keep getting invited on drives and wanted to be friendly,
Getting test cars and all that.
test cars and all that, and automakers who wanted to keep giving them what they had and were making tons of money even if their products were like even more inferior than they were the year before, like, and losing to the Japanese. Like, there's this very friendly world that existed. So in 2007, I was working for what was then the commercial mortgage-backed securities market. And if you've seen The Big Short, you know what the residential mortgage-backed securities market was like. The commercial mortgage-backed securities market was very similar to that. It was not quite as shady as the RMBS, which is residential world. It did not cause the economic collapse in 2008. However, when the economic collapse in 2008 happened, it was like the last domino to fall.
Right.
It was like everything else had fallen. Well, this is also kind of a house of cards, and it fell. So I was working in that market, and I knew at the time that it was going to all I was not a genius.
You had to
but
see it, right?
You could just like any moron, and I was a moron. I could tell like this is not a long-term thing.
Yeah.
So Jalopnik on their like 200-person Facebook page had posted. Now it's like 300,000 or 400,000. They had posted, "Hey, we need a professional. We need an intern for the Chicago Auto Show." And I was living in Chicago at the time. Someone with a DSLR camera to shoot for us, because Jalopnik then was like 4 people. It was like Davey, so it was like Davey Johnson, who's a car driver now, Johnny Lieberman, who's at Motor Trend, Murley Martin, who's also a T-Tac and kind of car driver a little bit, Ray Wirt, who's now at General Motors, or he's got his own private thing, but he's works for General Motors. He's a Chevy guy, and Mike Spinelli, who's now over at Drive. And so like they were too cheap to pay for a photographer. So I applied, and I lied. I didn't even have a digital camera. I was like, sure, I'll do it.
Right.
And they were like, great, we'll get you a press pass. And so I had to ask my girlfriend at the time, who's not my wife, but I asked my girlfriend to borrow her, I want to say 2 megapixel digital Kodak camera.
Perfect.
So like I get on the train, it's miserable. Auto shows to be like completely abolished, but like having one in Chicago in late February, early March is like cruel beyond belief. And so like I go down there and I show up with my camera, and Ray Wirt takes one look at it, and he's like, "What the hell is this?"
Oh, he's there.
He was there. He's like, "What is this?" And I'm like, "It's my digital camera." And it's like, "You said you had a DSLR." And I'm like, "Well, technically, when I emailed back, I said I have a digital camera."
Yeah, a digital camera was my response.
Yeah, I said I have a digital camera, and he's like, he's like, "This is worse than the camera that we have." And I was like, "But I can write." So he was like, "Well, we got you a press pass, I guess." And so I went to like my first press conference ever, and I covered the Ford 500 was being renamed the Ford Taurus because Mark Fields had realized smartly that no one knew what a 500 was, but like Taurus had like 96% like brand recognition. And so they I worked for them, and I covered this press conference. I wrote for 2 days, and they were like, "Okay, you're not a moron and you're cheap. We will pay you to write like a couple articles a week."
Right.
So I wrote for them for a while. I'd wanted to get into politics in Chicago for some terrible reason. I got into it. I quit Jalopnik. Stupid move. I quit Jalopnik. Went full-time working for a political firm. Spent every day reading Jalopnik and like hating my life for doing it. I mean, I liked where I worked. I liked the people, but I just like missed the car world.
What were you doing at the firm?
It was a political communications firm. So I was the managing director. Like, it was a small firm, so they needed help. So I was doing support, lobbying support.
Is there any money in that, by the way?
Yeah, Sean's been talking about this.
I want to start doing political videos because I have no bottom. Like, I think this is a business I need to get into.
There's a ton of money. There's a guy named who does amazing car videos, and you've probably seen his work because he's done car videos for everyone. A company called Studios.
Sure.
He did all the
We're
original
gonna bleep that out.
VR stuff, right? He bleep it out, please. He did all the VR stuff for Autoblog initially for like AOL Autos.
Cool.
His real moneymaker is he works with another guy who loves cars, like a huge car guy out of Nebraska named Casey Phillips, and his company does every even numbered year like 6 months of nothing but political ads, and you get bonuses if you win. And so they worked for like the worst kind of like conservative
Dude, that's you.
but who cares?
You
like,
got this.
you know. And I worked in politics. I worked mostly for Democrats.
I want to do tobacco and big oil lobbying. That's my interest. Right.
Take their money.
Right.
Yeah,
Like,
that's what I'm
just
saying.
take the
This is
money.
this is what I'm saying. I want this business. So anyway, how do I get into this?
And they take it. Just draft on Doug. Like, people need podcasts for conservatives. And like,
Okay.
it's just so.
Yes.
Dinner with conservatives.
Dinner with conservatives. Dinner with big oil.
Why not? Somebody has to front for these people, and it's just so much money.
Right.
But I worked in I worked for like the Illinois Midwifery Association,
Okay.
Midwest High Speed Rail,
Yes.
people who had no money but good causes.
Right. So you're a
and
guy with heart.
I was a guy with heart,
Yeah,
so
that doesn't
I
work.
was not successful.
Yeah.
Right.
And then the Cars.com, which is based in Chicago,
Yeah.
and very nice people work there, had an opening for an associate editor, and I was thinking of applying. So I went back to Ray Wirt, who was then an associate editor at Jalopnik, but was about to become editor-in-chief. And I was like, hey, can you put in a good word for me? Because you know all those guys over at Cars.com, and I live in Chicago, and like, you know, it's easy to go work for them. Somehow Ray misheard this as they have offered me a job.
Oh, okay.
And so he goes, what are they going to pay you? And I just made up a number.
Right. Right.
And I was
You
like,
lie a
Does
lot.
he
I
know?
lie
Yeah,
all the time. And that's the best.
You should have
Honestly,
stayed in
Wait,
politics.
when he misheard you, was it because you told him I have a job offer at Cars.com?
no,
Okay.
he's just like a crazy person.
Oh, yeah.
and I just said, hey, you know, there's this job over. To be fair, I was vague. I said, there's this job over at Cars.com.
Right.
And before I could say, put in the good word for me, he says, what are they going to pay you? And so I gave him a number, and he's like, well, I can match it. And I said, and then just in my mind, I'm like, well, I'm just going to go with this. I'm like, well, but for associate editor. And he says, I'll make you associate editor. And I said,
Nice.
okay.
What's happening right
Right.
now? Yeah.
And so I never applied for a job. They just gave me a job.
So kids, lying like a mother is the key.
Yeah, just lie.
Yeah.
The funny thing is that when I tried to get my first IMSO license in like 2004, they asked me. I had raced Formula Mazda and SCCA, and I go in. I'm like, yeah, I'm here to get an LMP2 license with like no experience, and they're like, you race you race Star Mazda, right? Which is the Pro Series, and I was like, yeah, I race Formula Mazda. She's like, yeah, I thought so. Come on down. And like, I had a license before my credit card cleared.
Nice.
Yeah. Okay. So I get it.
Yeah, no.
I
I
have a
think
digital camera.
I think the trick in life is to, if you think that you can't do the job, don't lie. Because then you're going to get caught out and things
Right,
are going to go
right,
bad. But
right.
if you know you can do the job,
Yeah, yeah.
if you know you can race, if you know you can write, just lie and no one's going to care.
I really like the phrase "fake it till you make it."
Yeah.
You know, if you believe in yourself and you're like, I know I can get this done.
The ready, fire, aim.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Right.
So you come back on board then for the second time, but now it's like a real position, associate editor.
Yeah, it's like a real position. Although I was still getting paid per post. It was awful.
Okay.
I got paid $12 per post.
Oh.
So I had to write 12 posts a day and a feature a week to have enough money to pay rent.
Right.
Yeah, because you're living in New York at this time.
I was living in Chicago.
Oh, okay.
It's
but
still kind of expensive.
Yeah, it's not cheap.
And so I had to, I went back to check because I was curious. Sorry. I went back to check because I was curious. I have written 10,500 posts.
I'd say 12 posts a day. Like, you're just scrounging for shit.
Yeah, at that point
point.
you're just like, that's a story.
Nonsense.
Yeah.
Oh, new wheels on the Seat Libra Coupe? Cool. That's a story.
Yep. That's 300 words.
And that was Jalopnik for like a couple of years because,
Yeah.
you know, the history of automotive media is like the way that you get paid. And so if you get, at least online, and if you get paid by page views and impressions, you write to just get anything out.
Yeah, exactly. And at this point, I assume Jalopnik wasn't really a money maker as much as sort of an investment potential.
No, I mean, I'm sure it made money because it was so cheap, but you were just trying to like get impressions. But then eventually, like people who advertise realized that like, well, you want unique visitors because someone can just read the same ad a million times. So when that shifted, which was like, 4 years ago, then it became like, well, how do we do stories that people care about? How do we get scoops? How do we write things that people want to read? And that like fundamentally altered what Jalopnik was, as opposed to just, which was great. Like the old Jalopnik is awesome of just like posting everything and hoping something hits.
Right.
It's like, well, let's be efficient and let's let's post something that people might care about. And a good example of this is like Sam Smith, who's over at Road Track now, wrote an article about this crazy guy named Bill Coswell, who took a Craigslist car, like a car he bought off BMW, bought off Craigslist, put a little bit of money into it, is an insane person, and went down to the Rally Mexico because there was like a weird quirk in the rules, and like anyone could kind of enter because they wanted people to enter, and like get third place at like a real FIA rally. I mean, he's lowest class, but like a real actually podium in a real rally.
Yeah.
And that story, which I don't think anyone else would have thought to even tell, did like at the time like 1 million views. Now it's like less so, but like 1 million people reading something is like if you think of what actual circulation is for a magazine and what people actually read read online or what people see on TV, like 1 million people reading something was like humongous, and, like earth shattering. And that article really set the tone for Jalopnik. We would do stupid stuff and we would still do funny stuff and we'd still write about stuff that really honestly no one cared about, but like the idea was, what are the stories that we can tell that no one else would think to tell, or like that would just like totally not fit into their like normal schema of like what is reportable.
These are the stories that are not akin to necessarily having to get into Ford press car. You're there because it's interesting, and that's what you think is going to drive the viewership.
Online media, like automotive online media, like any online media, gives into bad instincts because you can do something that will get readers, but it's terrible. You can write. I mean, I will tell you because I've read all of the and I wrote for so long. Like there were stories of like for a weird period there were like all these stories you could find of like people having basically neurological, psychological breakdowns, and they would do crazy things with cars, like drive a car through the window of a Ferrari dealer. Which isn't to say that it's not news. It's certainly newsworthy. It's certainly completely reasonable to post, and people would love to read it. Right. But just because it's newsworthy doesn't mean it's actually interesting.
You can read so many of these. She drove her ex-husband's car to the lake kind of thing.
Right. Like it gets boring. And so, but that was like in the page view era. But in the unique era, it was like, well, this is interesting, but like what is the little and one? Like what is the actual other thing that makes this something that I would want to read about? And usually in those cases, it's less like here's something that's scandalous, and it's like here's something that like reveals something about humanity. Like here's something that actually talks about. Like a good example is Patrick George, who's now the editor-in-chief of Jalopnik, got pulled over he was on a press drive, and he was like getting on an on-ramp onto a road in Central Virginia, in the middle of nowhere. And I used to live in Central Virginia, and it's all the middle of nowhere. And he was just like, he was behind the group, and he was like, well, screw it. Like I'm just gonna blast 100 miles an hour up an on-ramp where no one's around, and if I get hurt, I only you don't do this, kids, don't drive fast. But like no one was around, and of course what he didn't realize, and I knew living in Central Virginia, was that there are wherever you think is the middle of the nowhere, that is exactly where a police officer is. And so he got pulled over. And the other reason I didn't drive fast when I lived in Virginia, even though I had like all sorts of press cards, was that if you drive 50 miles an hour over the speed limit, it is akin to animal cruelty. It's like hosting a dog fight. It is automatic jail time.
Wow.
Ooh.
So he went to jail for 3 days. But he called me after this happened because it's a highest, it's not a felony, but it's the highest level misdemeanor.
Right.
It's a class 3. And so he called me and he was like, Patrick was like, he was like very upset and he's very sad, and he's like, if you fire me, like I understand, like I did something wrong. And like conveniently I lived in Virginia, so I was experienced with what Virginia like the laws were and how arbitrary it was county to county. With like in most counties they would just say like insufficient equipment, like if it was your first offense, they would it was like $50 fine, because I've been in the car where someone got pulled over that happened, and they just write it off and it's fine.
Yeah, I got pulled over in Central Virginia coming from VIR. Okay. And he let me go.
Oh yeah, it happened. Yeah,
So,
like if you're in like Albemarle County, you're probably okay.
Right.
If you're in Loudoun County, you're probably okay.
This was Mecklenburg.
If you're in Mecklenburg, you actually probably got lucky.
Oh, okay.
Like honestly, like, and it depends. But if you're in certain places, if you're east or west of there, like you're screwed. And he was west of there, and so he got screwed. So I was just like, hey man, as long as you write it up, we'll be okay. And Patrick wrote up his story.
Right,
yeah, no, and he wrote up his story of what it was like to be in prison for 3 days.
Yeah.
Because he had to go for 3
For
days.
an on-ramp,
For driving up an on-ramp too fast. And like he was in there with people who had like beaten their wives. Done all these terrible things. And
I mean, was it the full-on thing? Was it like a holding cell, or was he like legitimately?
No, he was in jail.
Like in the jumpsuit,
he was
a fight.
He was
with
full
processed.
thing.
He
He
was
was processed in.
Wow.
And the only break that he got from the judge was that he went in on a Friday night and got out on a Sunday. So it was 3 days,
Okay.
but it was like Friday night, all of Saturday and then like half of Sunday. Except when he was trying to get out, they lost it, like somehow misplaced his paperwork and he was almost stuck in there. There's also another thing, like had he not been like a connected journalist with money, and I hooked him up with a lawyer who I knew in the area, like he could have, if he didn't have any resources, he could have been stuck for another week until they found his paperwork.
Right. Yeah.
But he called in, like his wife called in like a panic, and like we were able to figure it out. But like that's not a story for like Motor Trend. Like Motor Trend's like Dodge gave us money. Here's a story for a thing. We put a Dodge engine in a car.
Trim package.
Exactly. But it was like a story for Jalopnik. And the only problem we've had is now that Jalopnik's become this thing where like there's a ton of readers and like we're influential. Is like we've had to reckon with the fact that like we could be, I don't want to say careless, but like the stakes were lower when there aren't that many people reading you and you're just a bunch of kids writing about things. And now that you have influence and like people read you and they do or do not buy cars or they have opinions about things, and it like affects it, like the reckoning has come where we've had to accept that we have some responsibility for what we write. Even before all this like crazy Hogan stuff, like it's just like we had to reckon with the fact that like we could get people fired or destroy people's careers or like in car. Like there's a person who, and we're cool now, but there's a person who blames me for the destruction of Fisker as a car company.
Really?
Yes.
Congratulations.
I destroyed
I
Fisker.
that kind of power.
I mean, they're back. It's fine. It's Carmel Automotive. But I wrote a bunch of stories about their cars catching on fire. And it was one of those things where like I was partially lucky to get in on this story early. And so when anyone had a tip, and like it's their fault for their cars catching on fire. If anyone had a tip, they would like let me know. And then it all ended where they had a bunch of cars in Port in New Jersey, and then Sandy hit.
Oh, right.
And a bunch of their cars were in Port got waterlogged. And when these electric cars get waterlogged, they caught on fire. But other cars caught on fire. Like it was not just them. But it just so happened that like dozens of Fisker Karmas caught on fire. And I can't tell because I can't burn my source. But no one... I had a source who was there and provided me photos of this, and I like had the worst, like maybe second worst automotive like journalist phone call I ever had, where I called Fisker and I was like, "Hey, do you want to comment on all of these cars burning down?" Because they were importing them from like Finland, so it's not like they have like
you're advertising that you're going to do something when you say that.
Yeah, I mean, like I'm a reporter. Like I'm like going to report the story. I'm not going to like bury a story.
Right.
And so, and like Sandy's like huge news, and this is like a huge percentage of like the number of cars they have anywhere in the world. And they're like, we don't know what you're talking about. And I realized, they have no idea that like a huge percentage of their inventory was destroyed.
Call me back in an hour.
Yeah.
You're going to know.
And they called, they're just like, we have nothing to say. We have to like, someone has to go over there and confirm that this is true. But I knew it was true because I had photos, like I had evidence, like I had backed it up, like I called other people, like I knew that it had happened. And I wrote the story, and then like screwing out of business, and like, it's not. And it was just like a realization. Like on one hand, like I didn't burn the cars.
You didn't
like,
do it.
I did. I was accurately reporting on things that had happened.
Yeah.
On the other hand, Jalopnik accurately reporting on things that had happened in a way that was probably not true in years before. Like had a significant like investors, like the whole like because it had a huge amount of like Silicon Valley, like it had an impact, like people who could potentially buy it, like it had an impact on the market. And that was just like, oh, well, what we say matters, and we need to be responsible for that. We need to think about that, and that led to like a big change in how we reported things. Like we still want to be out there on the edge. We still want to report things that we believe are true and we know are true. And even if automakers don't want us to publish that, but like we need to understand that like we can affect the market, we can affect lives, like billions of dollars. Like you have to accept that fact, or else you're going to make mistakes that aren't worth making. You have to understand, like if a company gets destroyed, like jobs get lost, whatever. Because I know other people who've like said like you're the reason why I lost my job, like, and it's true, and they are not lying. Like that is what happened. And you just accept like that. Like the best quote I ever heard was a guy who used to work here, who works at Slate now, and he said, and this is after the Manti Te'o thing, where Deadspin pointed out that a guy who was pretending to have like a dead girlfriend had made it all up, and like every media organization bought it because like I understand that like you're not gonna like, well, let's get the death records to confirm this. Like if a guy says like his girlfriend died,
you leave it alone.
You just like don't want to like prod. But Deadspin was like, well, admittedly the story got crazier and crazier, and like at that point there was a point where like reasonable journalists should have said, well, we should confirm any of this, and they didn't. And so Deadspin got the story. So there was a like a sports journalism like website and like magazine like wanted to talk to him about it. And the reporter like entirely was in this mode of like old school journalism and like how things were supposed to happen. And eventually Tommy Craggs over at Slate now, who's an editor over here at Deadspin, who's the editor-in-chief of Deadspin for a while, was like, look, like at its core, journalism is nothing more than professionalized rudeness. Like that's what it is. Like
I like that. Yeah.
Like I remember when Coddington died. And Boyd Coddington died.
Right.
And like this was like an early big story. And I had gotten a tip that he was dead from like a couple people. So like it was like reasonable enough to follow. And I had to like call his like family.
Right.
Because like, I wasn't going to report it just like, oh, hey,
Right,
someone's
right,
dead.
right,
Like, no, you need to like make sure that's true. But you also have to call to make, but it's like a big story. It's like newsworthy.
Yeah.
And like you have to call people who are going to be personally touched and affected by this.
They
and
know,
like,
yeah.
and know
Right,
them and just
yeah.
go like, hey, like, this is
Sorry.
terrible, but would you confirm to me that this person that you care about is dead?
Right.
And that's like a rude thing to ask in
Yeah.
a way, but
Yeah.
it's also completely reasonable
It's
for
your
journalists to
job,
do.
right.
And like I remember they were like sad on the other end of the line, like he was like crying in the background. And they're like, yeah, like we don't have a statement, but like yes, you are correct. Like a statement's gonna come, and so it was just like we reported on it. And this was like, oh God, maybe it was 2007, maybe 2008.
Right.
And I feel bad that I don't remember now, but like he's
Sure,
dead.
it happened.
And like we were the first people to report on it. And that was like my biggest story for like 2 years. But it was still like I didn't feel great.
Sure.
But it was people cared, and you know it was a thing. And like Boyd's wife has been awesome, and like you know we've gotten other stories and we've written about things, and it was like everyone understood like that's the job
That
of
was
a
your
reporter.
duty. Yeah, sure.
But it's definitely a weird thing.
Yeah.
Especially in the current climate, do you guys find yourself ever being a little more cautious knowing the lawsuit component of this deal?
No one at Gawker got sued for libel. Right, or the Hulk Hogan suit was not a libel suit.
Right.
It was something else.
Right.
Until I am proven wrong and there are appellate courts to go through, the laws that apply to journalistic entities are well established, and they are libel laws.
Right.
And I think that from the perspective of what libel is in America, and it's different in Britain,
Right.
as Bernie Ecclestone and Max Mosley will tell you, it's different in Britain.
Yep.
In the United States, you have to know something is false,
Yep.
and you have to be malicious. Like you have to know it's false, and you have to print something false,
Yep.
knowingly false, in order to hurt someone.
Exactly.
And that is a reasonable standard.
Right.
If I know something is not true, and I print it, and I do it to hurt someone, I should definitely be held liable for that.
Absolutely. Yeah.
And I don't know any reasonable person who would say that that's not the case.
Right.
If I print something about a public figure, the other thing about this has to be a public figure. If I print something
I'm
about
fully aware of public figure and
Right.
parody.
It's on
So,
your website.
yeah.
So if I write about somebody who's a public figure correctly, within reasonable bounds,
Yeah.
like is it irrelevant what somebody's like daughter goes to daycare? No, I don't think so. You know, I mean, you know, unless it's in a story, but I can't even think of an example that's the case.
Yeah,
But if I write about something that's true about someone, if you're a race car driver and you get a DUI,
Yeah.
and I write about that,
Yeah.
that's that is a reasonable thing to write about someone who's a race car driver,
Yeah,
and it's reasonable
absolutely.
to report that.
Yeah.
I'm not even going to name someone because they're like crazy, but like if Racer McRacy gets in it, like
Right.
you know, like that's a reasonable
If
thing.
you're a German BMW driver who
That
gets
wasn't a DUI.
put in a holding cell because you're pissing in a gas station
On a gas pump.
on a gas pump. Oh, you probably know about this.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Or an Olympian.
Yeah.
Like yeah, you know, like that's reasonable.
Yeah.
Great journalistic work by Billy Bush. Like you know, you're
May he
like
rest
that's
in peace.
reasonable.
R.I.P. Billy Bush.
And so like
I wonder if he'll be dead by this time.
oh God.
Anyway, go on.
So like you know, I don't want to be swayed by it, but it is scary.
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah,
it
of
is
course.
definitely
You know it can happen, sure.
scary
Right.
that someone even take the media thing out of it. That like a billionaire, and someone did this to Mother Jones magazine too. Like a billionaire can like, and Sheldon Adelstein about like
Right.
a billionaire can affect the news in a way by through concerted legal efforts,
Right.
privately, and for a while just completely hidden.
Well, that's
like it's terrifying,
Yeah.
and I know people whose lives are being personally destroyed
right.
by articles they wrote, and that's scary.
Well, and the scary thing about something like Peter Thiel, and I know this firsthand, is that something can be completely frivolous, but they can still tie up your assets in having to deal with it. You know, anyone can file a lawsuit, whether it's bullshit or not. And so now you have to spend legal fees to try and fight it. You have to spend legal fees to try and say, no, this is erroneous. Let's get it thrown out. That still costs money, and that still is a drain on a small company.
Absolutely,
Yeah.
and it's been reported, and it's probably in the bankruptcy documents now. Like Gawker was a profitable company
Right.
and was then a profitable company, but for this the legal costs associated with this. But it was an independent media company. It was the largest, probably existing media company of its kind in the world, that existed. And it was perfectly vulnerable to this. Whereas, I think as scary as all this is, like if you're a multi-billion-dollar media company, you're less vulnerable, because even though you don't want to pay these legal fees, you will keep paying
It's less
them
of a deal,
and
and
fight.
somebody's less likely to mess with you because they know you've got the resources for
take care
it.
of it.
So,
Exactly.
yeah.
And we were unfortunately in a position where we were, I feel like Gawker Media was like a bastion of truth telling.
And that's what I'm saying, that-
for good or bad, sometimes
Right.
but I think mostly for good, a bastion of truth telling, but also in a position where they weren't owned by anyone else. There
Right.
weren't there wasn't VC.
But-
it was just its own company.
But the bigger picture, I think, fear that's come out of this particular deal is that smaller, sort of less commercially held media companies are all in danger of one rich guy trying to sort of run them down by legal fees, by erroneous processes, et cetera, et cetera. So we've kind of allowed this now culture of the companies that can afford it or not be hit as much to be the ones that survive, and it goes back to the sort of bad journalism that we could be stuck in.
It's not bad journalism. It's just like safe journalism.
Safe journalism,
Yeah,
I guess that's a better term.
And safe journalism rarely serves anyone.
Right.
If I get
So
a
it's bad.
call from an automaker that's like, "Hey, this article was great. I loved it." That's not like a happy call.
Yeah, I
when,
get it.
when I get a call that's like, sometimes you get a call and it's like, "Well, you got this wrong. Here's why." And it's like, "Okay, I feel bad about that. I understand your
Right.
position.
Right.
We need to correct this."
But to just say don't do it.
But just to be like, "You got this so wrong. It's terrible. But we know we got it wrong." And it's like, "Well, explain to me how we got it wrong." It's like, "Well, it's bad for us." And it's like,
Right.
"Well, that doesn't mean that it's wrong.
Yeah.
It just means that it's bad for you." And I understand that if you're a press person and a PR person, like it's your position that you have to complain about this. And I know the best PR people I know in the industry, whether they work for motorsports, they work for automotive, or they work for defense contractors or whatever, will sometimes get in my face and will complain about things.
Right.
And like, I understand that it is their job to complain about those things.
Yeah.
And they understand that it's my job to print those things.
Right.
And at the end of the day, they say their piece, and I listen to them, and I hear them out, and I say, I respectfully disagree, and we move on, and we have relationships, and
Yeah.
we can
Right.
continue to go forward.
It's in everybody's best interest to keep a relationship.
Exactly. And there are some people who just don't understand that and either internalize as individuals that whatever bad is said about the company is bad about them.
Right.
And they can't move on, and those
Right.
people usually don't last very long. Or they work for companies that don't understand the cost of doing business, that sometimes journalists write true things that are bad about
Right.
them. And those companies have a hard time. And probably the best example of this is Tesla's. Tesla is an amazing company, and what they produce is I love driving a Model S, and what they produce is amazing. And they sometimes have a hard time accepting negative coverage of themselves.
Sure.
And the number of PR people that have gone through Tesla, amazing people who are great, and I've had relationships with after they worked at Tesla. They just have a hard time because they work for someone, and I've conversed very minimally with Elon, but we've had some short, interesting conversations. And he's a true believer, and he thinks that media should help him with what he does, and most of the time he gets away with that.
Yeah.
Right.
And it's hard for them when they get any kind of critical coverage.
We actually, kind of funny to hear you have the same, you have the real versions of this, but we had two situations last year where on this podcast where we got an inside thing that we kind of asked about, and it was denied on air, and then after the fact the person would tell us, "Oh yeah, that thing you asked, that's exactly right." And one of them was a really big,
something that could
it would be a great Jalopnik article, and it would really
it would kill our careers.
It would, I'd never be allowed to race in certain series again. Yeah. And but it was one of those things where we were like, this is just
Can't
a
do it.
podcast.
Yeah, can't do it.
We're just doing this for fun, but it's actually your job. You're like, oh, I need that
Yeah.
story. I need to know what that was. And we had this weird. We had another situation where somebody was a little inappropriate, and we were like, well, we need to clean this up now
For them.
for their sake.
Yeah.
Because we're not here to try to disparage someone's career.
Well, but that's
Well, that actually happens. We had an interview, a live interview, but it was thankfully only on internet answer questions. You've done this before with us. Sorry, ask me anything. And there was a race car driver who, still on the record, in the universe of on the record, showed us some things and told us some things that were highly, terribly inappropriate.
Yeah.
And this kid, because he existed in a universe of friendly, slap your back automotive media, did not occur to him that what he had said was awful and
Please
would
tell me this was Connor
disqualify him for riding for like driving for like a huge chunk of his life.
Right.
And we had like a discussion, and it was like a judgment call. And no one cared. Like, this person's like a race car driver, but no one really, it's not a big name. No one cares. It's not Helio Castroneves. It's like, no one cares. Like, anyone cares.
Was it Connor Daly?
It was not, I wish.
Is this the Jeremy Clements thing?
No, this wasn't Jeremy. We can talk about the Jeremy Clements thing.
Okay, yeah, we'll come back.
We'll
to
get to the Jeremy
yeah.
Clements thing. This was somebody who, like, wasn't even as big a name as Jeremy Clements in the United
wow.
States. Because it's sports car racing, no offense. But, like, no one cared.
Yeah.
Now we gotta know. Yeah.
We'll bleep it.
Yeah, or not.
And
depending
so,
if we like him.
So we were just like,
No offense.
the minimal. Well, you know what it is.
I don't give a
We know.
You're not an IndyCar driver. It could be worse.
Yeah.
And so we were like, yeah, the story is like a 13-second anyone cares about.
Yeah.
This person was just being young and dumb, and their offense wasn't even really offense. It was just them oversharing, really.
Sure.
Something that they, like a Tinder thing that they should not have overshared about Tinder.
Okay.
And so we just like let it slide. It was not worth the trouble to them, and our readers did not care who this person was. So, like, the ultimate judgment call is, would our readers benefit from knowing this?
Yeah,
like,
exactly.
if somebody had admitted to like sexual assault, like, that is a story.
Yeah, right,
If
right,
someone had admitted to just being a dumbass on Tinder,
Yeah.
well, no one
here's-
cares.
Here's our challenge, and I wonder if it's the same for you, because
Our challenge.
with
Dinner with Racers.
Here's my struggle. I read a
Yeah,
book.
Mein Kampf.
I think about one specific incident last year where there were.
You can't give it away.
No, I can't.
Yeah.
But there was a lot of alcohol, and a lot of things were said where we're like, we can't let this person burn themselves with what they're saying. We just can't. But it was partially about protecting a friend, but it was also, this is our first season out the gate, and if we put out stuff that's very career damaging for them, it's going to fuck up our chances to get additional guests.
Right.
down the road. And that was ultimately like, you know what? This is our first season. We need to be able to be the nice, fun little podcast that people like being onto, not something where somebody's afraid they're going to say something that's career damaging. And that's that. Yeah. So the Gotcha Motorsports podcast, I don't think was where we wanted to go.
Right.
But do you find yourself stuck in that at all? That you don't want to burn a bridge because you might need that bridge later on?
No, I have burned many bridges.
Pizza's good though. Not
Here's
even a hesitation.
here's my
No
life. Like,
hesitation.
I'm not going to throw anyone under the bus.
Right.
But if somebody who should know better walks in front of the bus, it's not my job to pull them out of the way.
Right.
I would also argue you're in
yeah.
a bigger world too, though. Like the automotive world is a much bigger palette than motorsports. Was actually kind of where I wanted to go with this. Was that okay? We talked about cars, but the motorsport world is a very specific world within that, and no one's going to Jalopnik for the latest practice results in stock cars. No one's going to Jalopnik to figure out who's leading in F1 right now. That's not your place. So where have you kind of defined motorsports within Jalopnik, and where have you defined it within kind of the motorsports audience?
Sure. I mean, we don't want to be Racer. We don't want to be motorsports.com.
Right.
For two reasons.
Those are
One,
the only two automotive racing websites that I can think of.
Yeah,
So good
right?
job.
Yeah.
Okay.
And for two reasons. One is that they do what they do very well.
Right.
And there would be no reason to compete with them.
Sure.
Yep.
And the second thing is that we would like people to read what we write because
there's
there's an
that.
economic incentive to do that.
Yeah.
And the number of people, I don't want to dox this person, but a very good motorsports reporter said, I think, the most accurate thing about covering motorsports I'll ever hear in my life, which is that, and I keep ragging on IndyCar. I like IndyCar, but like...
No, rag on them.
Yeah,
please,
they
thank you.
basically, I mean, this person basically said, IndyCar fans are the greatest, all 12 of them.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so I think that for us, when we launched Black Flag, which is our like motorsports site,
Yeah.
we're
Section of
basically
it.
like, if we can't make motorsports relevant to people who do not like automatically wake up at 4 a.m. at Sunday morning to watch the Malaysian Grand Prix,
Yeah.
then we failed. Like, that's
Right.
our only job, is to make people who do not care about motorsports, because we personally love it,
Right.
care about motorsports.
Yeah.
That is our mission.
Right.
Anything else we can leave to Auto Week or Racer or Motorsports, and they'll do a great job of it for what they're supposed to do, and they will deliver for their audience what they want to deliver.
Right.
But like, I mean, a good example is like that weird, crazy Nissan, LMP1 car that they built.
Yeah.
We had a reporter in Austin who just happened to live in Austin,
We talked about this.
Yeah,
yesterday.
we've talked about this. Yeah.
and she just knew she was just like hanging out, and she like saw the car. And she like knew which corner like outside the track to hang out on, and got photos of the car.
Yeah,
and
right.
like, and other motorsports reporters might like stop or might think like, is this like what we're supposed to report, or like they get
well,
invited
they
to
don't
this
want to
thing.
burn their deal with Nissan or whatever.
Right, whatever
yeah,
it is.
yeah.
But we were like, I mean, here's the damn car. Like, let's
Yeah.
just post photos of it. And you know, and it was fine. And like we're not going to die if we get pulled out. Like the FIA and Formula One motor management like repeatedly denies our credentials for things because we report
awesome.
accurately on what they do.
Yeah.
And we sometimes use GIFs. And they think a GIF is like a video.
You're not real.
Right.
And so
Too many dick jokes.
and so we're like, and it's, you know, we don't want, and they're like, well, if you delete every GIF you've ever posted, like we will give you credentials, and it's like not worth it to us.
Yeah.
We'll just watch it on TV.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I mean, if everyone else is playing one game, this is like war games, right?
Right.
Like the only way to win is not to play. Like
Right.
the
Right.
only way to win in motorsports coverage is not to play the game that I was on a panel with some automotive, you know, big time automotive editors or whatever.
Sure.
And someone bragged about having a reporter at every F1 race. And I didn't realize that their outlet covered Formula One.
Like, oh, huh.
And so that
Right.
I mean, that basically
That
says
should
it
tell you
all.
everything.
Yeah.
Kind of painting a realistic commercial picture of where motorsports fits in the automotive landscape. I sometimes
It doesn't.
That's what I'm
Yeah,
saying.
yeah.
I mean, you guys cover everything. In my head, motorsports doesn't really register that much compared to other stuff.
No,
Yeah.
it doesn't.
Yeah.
Motorsports is, as someone who loves motorsports, who watched WRC stuff
Yeah.
on Speed Vision.
Way back.
Right,
way.
I mean,
right.
somebody who really cares,
Right.
it's vestigial.
Yeah. 100%.
It doesn't need to exist.
Yep.
Yeah.
If anything, amateur racing is almost more interesting to
Yeah.
me as someone who cares about automotive.
Yeah.
Like if we're a car company like that, you know, people who go to HPDE days, I think
Yeah.
that there's more relevance of that.
And that's more your audience. Yeah.
Yeah, than anything that is done by professionals. Like NASCAR in the United States and Formula One globally are the two exceptions.
Right.
And there are regional things, like people in Finland care about European Rallycross,
Sure,
and
sure.
you have to contend with that.
Like if
but
you post about NASCAR, you actually get numbers.
sometimes,
Really?
but
Sure.
actually NASCAR is less and less relevant.
Seems
to
less
people.
your audience. Yeah, but
I mean, less anyone's audience.
Sure.
NASCAR is facing the same problem that the Republican Party has, which is that people who care about that are dying.
yeah.
Of cardiac problems, says the guy
right.
eating pizza as we
Cattle
talk.
Yeah, about to say
Yeah.
cheese
and,
whiz.
and so you have to contend with that, and I enjoy watching World Challenge, and I enjoy watching IMSA and all of these things, but I'm a weirdo.
Yeah,
and
right.
I'm a
Totally.
weirdo for
You're
liking
a
that.
small
Yeah.
group of people.
And I don't buy cars based on that. I
right.
bought an old Volvo, and I'm a weirdo anyway, so that's weird.
Right.
But, and I bought a Subaru Forester.
Right.
Subaru races in no series that I care about.
Yeah.
But I have a daughter and a wife, and I don't want them to die, and I
Right.
had a certain amount of money to spend, and so that's the decision making that led to me,
Yeah.
someone who is easily influenceable by the motorsports world.
Right.
I guess Colin McRae, in a little bit,
Sure.
back in
Absolutely.
influenced me, but that's where I end up. So I love motorsports, but motorsports needs to find a way to build a brand that is relevant for a world in which robots drive for us.
Yeah.
And they have yet to do that.
So pulling Ryan out of the equation here, drivers, teams, series, who thinking about your audience, who gets it?
There's a small world of people.
Does that mean I get it?
I
Yeah,
think you get
you're
it.
in it.
You
No,
get
no,
it.
no, I
appreciate
That
it.
was a
Like,
compliment.
no, I was
believe
like,
it or
wait,
not.
wait.
I'm saying because I don't want him to feel the pressure well,
No,
Ryan,
that's
clearly
not what this
gets
is.
it.
Yeah, but I was like, wait,
Yeah.
do I count?
No. I'm saying you count.
Fair
yeah,
enough.
you've
You
got a
do.
goddamn podcast.
I appreciate that.
Yeah, yeah.
You
Goddamn podcast.
to our readers, you are the most known driver in your series.
Okay, that's pathetic.
Which
I
is
changed
not-
everything I just
well-
said. I just changed everything I said.
I mean, but it's not relative necessarily to your success in the series.
Yeah, no, I
it
get
has
it.
nothing to do with whether it doesn't have to do with what you drive for, because our readers aren't excited about Acura. Success these days in this world has to do explicitly with your ability to break out of it.
Yeah.
And so
Yep. Fair enough.
Um,
all right.
like I'll give a good example. So Rain's a great example. Parker Kligerman is
Yeah.
the unluckiest
Love that guy.
guy.
Yeah.
in race. He does well. He gets himself onto a Sprint Cup team that like immediately folds, and is like never able to get himself like a reasonable ride again.
Right.
And will occasionally show up in races and do very well.
That's good.
Like he just won an ARCA. Like oh, just showed up. I haven't raced in an ARCA.
Yeah,
in
what are we
forever.
doing? Sure, I
I'll
got
just
it.
show up in ARCA and
Right.
just like LeBron James playing kindergartners, just like
Yeah.
destroys them. But he managed to be, because he was just randomly introduced to us by a very smart guy who then worked at NASCAR, now works at Anheuser-Busch. Was just like, hey, this person is like understands how the larger world, and it's
Right.
not like a 13-year-old who has like millions of dollars. Like
Yeah.
you should meet him. And I met Parker, and like he's like just like a weirdo like the rest of us, and we like immediately got along. And so like he was able to relate to other audiences, and he has. I would love for him to be. I mean, he admits himself, like if he had the money and like was backed by like Venezuela or something, like he'd have been in F1. He'd have been Pastor Maldonado.
Right.
He wasn't. The only like really good outlet for him was NASCAR, and he got a Penske position, which was pretty good early on in life, and like was able to like work himself up. And then it like all crumbled underneath him, and he had like economically very bad timing. But he was like a person who knew people and was able to break out, and so he's like a very nice career as like a normal human being. And like an intelligent person as like a commentator for NASCAR, and like he can build on that and be very successful because he's like a normal person. So they're like normal people in whatever racing series, and people who are cool who can break out. Like CJ is a good example. You had CJ on.
Yep.
CJ is like
We were talking about C.J. Wilson.
already CJ Wilson. CJ Wilson is like famous for being like a very he's not a very typical athlete. He's not a very typical person, but he's like a baseball pitcher, of which there are many throughout the years who are able to make money and have their own lives and do whatever afterwards, and maybe they stay in baseball and become pitching coaches and then managers or whatever and coaches, but or they like go off and open up like a car dealership in Sarasota. Like this is their life.
Right.
But he has a passion, and I would argue that CJ's passion for cars is honestly probably, and I don't know if he will say this himself very often, and I don't know if there are like secret parts of this podcast, like exponentially greater than his passion for baseball.
Oh, absolutely.
He doesn't hide that.
Yeah,
I mean, he
he's
doesn't.
Very happy to talk about it.
He'll like mention it, but like I mean, I think it's even stronger than what he will.
Yeah,
maybe
right.
even admit to himself. Like
Agreed.
he is a car person in like just a
Absolutely.
perfect pitcher's body, like a weird straight edge, like married to a model. Like CJ's own
What's
life
going
is
on
weird
here? Yeah.
himself, but he's just like a cool,
Just a good
normal
dude. Good
dude. And so where Jalopnik has like found, and readers have like found, sort of, it's like almost like kismet. Like I found these relationships, and I think they sort of advance out of motorsports in the general like realm of like the universe and the like the Jungian subconscious. It's like with people who are just chill and understand that like the world probably doesn't necessarily care about their series, but might be interested in the parts of their series that are interesting.
Yeah, sure.
Like Rob Holland. Like Rob Holland is a weird dude
Sure.
who's like, like it's like a giant black Mr. Clean
Right.
who lives on the Nürburgring and like races cars there and raced in British touring car for some reason. And there's no reason anyone should know who he is, except he like randomly reached out to us in the way that like we randomly met you, Ryan, or like randomly met other people, and we're just like, oh, these are cool people, and we should hang out and we should talk to them, and we should tell their stories because their stories are interesting. Whereas if you're somebody who comes through, and NASCAR and F1 are both identical in this way, is that they start at like 14, and you start at age 14. And I've met a million NASCAR drivers, and I've met a decent number of F1 drivers, and basically the year that you become like the real thing, the year that you're the shit, is the last year you start evolving as a human being.
Sure.
So if you're 19 and you land like a good, then like Nationwide or like Camping World like job, and like at a good team, like you from that point are still that person. And you still reference those movies, and you still live in that world, and like your maturity until you get out of it or you get a little bit older. Like if you're Jeff Gordon and like you get older, like like you eventually grow out of it and you realize what your pace is. Life moves on, but you end up in this weird spot. And there's like a very small number of people who can break out of that and just understand their place in society and the world, and can have perspective. And those are the people I think are ultimately successful. And I think those are the people who do well in motorsports because they don't assume everyone is watching their practice session.
Yeah.
If you assume people are watching your practice session, you do not have even in F1, even in NASCAR, you do not have a fair grasp on the way the world works.
Right. Agreed. I like that. One of my favorite personal moments with Jalopnik, from my own experience, was we posted a video years ago. Which one?
the one where we blew up the track.
Right.
So that was 2013.
Okay.
And I think it was Raphael got word of it, put it up, and half the comments were very like, "Oh, this is awesome." This was a Magnus video for Daytona years and years ago, and half the comments just pulled it apart and hated it, and
Right.
Evan was telling my partner Jason like, "Oh, should we show this to Sean because of all the hate?"
Right.
And Jason looked at it and went, "Oh yeah,
Yeah, he's gonna like
yeah,
this."
he's gonna love this." Like, I get excited when I see how much hate some of these things have. How do you guys respond? Because like, I feel like the Jalopnik audience is very conducive to just everyone's gonna have an awesome, horrible opinion about everything. How do you guys look forward to this stuff?
I mean, it's double-sided, right?
Yeah.
For every, like you said, like half the comments are great, half the comments are terrible.
Yeah.
And you have to see the benefit of both, because most of the positive comments are just like, you guys are awesome, you're great. Like, this is why everyone who writes for, and I don't want to pick on them, but like everyone who writes for Motor Trend lives in a bubble of thinking like everyone cares about their Chevy Malibu versus Toyota Camry presentation, because there are people who will fillet them because they want to be like close to this thing that they think is awesome.
I like that you said fillet.
Is that our first fillet?
That is our first fillet. Yeah.
I want this is a family oriented. I want to be.
Yeah, we're a family podcast.
I want to be classy about it.
How many times did Calvin Fish say?
Yeah, he said a lot. Like 65. Yeah.
Just you need a podcast that's just every one of those times. And if that's all you listen to, like you're gonna completely misunderstand your audience. And at the same time, there are people who will just say terrible, hateful garbage because anonymity plus a huge audience, because even a low-level comment on Jalopnik can theoretically be seen by 20 or 30,000 people, which is like a huge thing. Right. Like gives them the power to say whatever, and like you're in this weird world, and you should disregard most of that too.
Yeah.
And I think the key to surviving is looking at it and understanding what is valuable from both sides. And honestly, the more valuable stuff that I get is probably from the criticism. Probably from people
Real
saying,
criticism, not just somebody going bullshit.
yeah, just like you suck.
Yeah.
You're an asshole.
Right.
Typical.
Typical
Go
Jalopnik.
Aggies. Or slow news day. Like I got a whole list of things that are just like trigger words for me banning people. But very rarely have I like taken a positive comment and like please leave positive comments, but like have been like, oh great, this will positively impact the way that I do things.
Let's keep doing this.
Where I've seen like criticisms where it's like, hey, the way you write about this probably discourages people from. I mean, this goes back in way back when we were like very like not anti-Tesla but very skeptical in some ways good, in some ways bad, of a lot of new technology, Bolt or Leaf or whatever. And it's like, hey, I like your coverage, but there were like a couple people left comments that were like, hey, I like your coverage, but like, these are people who are trying to do things, and they're not being successful, obviously. But like the effort, I think, is worth like acknowledging. Like it's worth acknowledging that they're like doing something that most major auto manufacturers have like not even really attempted, or at least they've made like very showy but like disingenuous attempts at like building electric cars.
Yeah.
And I remember that when I took over the website, like that very much impacted me. And I was like, I think they're right. Like we should still be critical. We should not just accept everything that people say, but we should also, within, trying to be proportional, we should look at like what is the effort they're trying to make versus the like resources that they have.
Right.
And if they're trying to make whether they're a tuner or they're an electric car company or whatever, like if they're trying to do something amazing and they don't have a lot of resources, like as long as we acknowledge that, we should at least try to present what they're trying to do.
Yeah.
And so I took that to heart. And like one of the things that I'm most proud of Jalopnik now is that while they're still skeptical and they can be biting and cutting at points, they don't give people the benefit of the doubt, but they're willing to talk to someone and allow them to present their point of view to like give a reason. Like Elio is a good example. Elio, I think the people who run this is like the 3-wheeled like $7,000 car.
Yeah.
Oh, sure.
Like I think they genuinely want to build the thing that they want to build, and I think they genuinely think that they can be successful and have a model that they look at that can work. The problem is that their model, in my mind, relies on enough people buying into the dream to make it a reality.
That may not be there.
Yeah. And so like, and it's not a pyramid scheme, but it like they have to get enough people to put deposits on a thing that they've never driven.
Yeah, right.
And I think that it's okay to say like, well, here's what their vision is, and like give them space to say like this is what we want to do, but also report like, well, realistically, this is what it requires for them to do that. And if you're like a consumer, it's okay for you to say like, maybe I don't feel comfortable putting down a deposit for something that requires like a ton of people to put down a deposit on something that doesn't exist yet.
Yeah.
Right.
And which isn't to say that Elio can't be successful in some world, but like you should have all of that information. Whereas before, I think old Jalopnik would have been like, "Oh, this is bullshit vaporware," you know?
Right.
Yeah. No, it makes sense.
So I got a kind of a list of questions. I know you got to go at a certain time, so I don't want to overrun.
No, we got a while. Keep going.
Who's the most flame contributor at Jalopnik?
The most flamed contributor, sadly, is Patrick George.
Yeah.
Like Patrick did the thing that no other auto journalist I can think of has done, which is that he was driving a car, and like Patrick doesn't pretend. He's gone to racing school, but like he doesn't pretend to be like the best driver in the world. But it was like his first time on camera, and he was trying to talk and drive at the same time. And having done that myself, like sideways in the snow in like a Mercedes station wagon, like I can tell you, like it's not easy to do. And I've done it with the McLaren, like it's like the faster the car, the worse the track. And like Belle Isle with like nothing but concrete, it's like maybe the worst place I could think of to try to do this. Got out on the track and was with a guy that I know forever. He used to work with me like doing video, and he like just didn't pay attention for like a tenth of a second and beefed it.
Yeah.
And his reactions were bad and like crashed the car and owned up to it.
Yeah.
And the problem is there are many car magazines, I won't name. Some of them might
He just wrote down Auto Week and handed us a piece of paper that said Auto Week. No.
rhymes with rotormend. And have like written off cars and not not honestly reported on them doing it because they don't want to like give up the idea that they're like all badasses who are the like best drivers in the world.
Right.
And he takes shit for that all the time. But like Patrick used to cover when I hired Patrick and like he used to cover murders for the Austin American-Statesman.
Okay.
His beat was covering death.
Right.
And people getting like cops. Like he was on the cop beat.
Yeah.
Which is, probably the hardest job at any newspaper.
Yeah.
Because you're like going to like funerals at people's
terrible
houses.
stuff all the
Like
time.
you have to be a real reporter to like get through that.
Yeah.
And because you have to deal with cops who are like misleading you and families who are like sad and lawyers are like you're like going to like body bag crime scenes.
Yeah.
And then he gets flamed all the time by people who are like, "Oh, who's this bozo?" And they like put in a gif of him like crossing his arms and like crashing. And it's like 99% of those people, if you put them in a car and put a camera on them and told them to talk, would go into the wall. Yeah, one or two corners earlier, they'd have been in the wall.
Right.
So like
that was the first, like the new Z28, right, or something. It was like the new Camaro.
It was the brand new Camaro,
like,
and the backstory to that is that we had been invited up there, and we said no because there was no news value to going, and General Motors had like basically begged us to like send someone, and I was like, Patrick, are you doing? And I didn't want to go, and I was like, Patrick, are you doing anything this weekend or Friday? It was like a Friday or whatever. I was like, are you doing anything? And he was like, nah, I can go. So like we like last minute like booked a flight, got him up there, didn't want to be there. There was no. And we had also people had said they didn't want to go because it was just like them unveiling a car.
Yeah.
And we're like, we can cover it, like it's the internet.
Right.
We can cover it from here. We don't need to go. And they're like, last minute added this driving program where you can drive a car out on a track for like 3 laps. And like if you have 3 laps and you have to do video, and I was like, well, the only reason, and this is my fault too. I was like, the only reason we should go is if we can get video of it because we just launched our video team. So it's like, well, our video department. It's like, well, on our YouTube channel. I'm like, well, let's get video. So Patrick is like going to a thing he doesn't want to go to, at a thing that they'd like very like last minute organized, like, we'll just throw some cars on the track because it's Belle Isle and it's all set up anyways.
Right.
The weekend before the race or whatever it was, and it was like we'll just go out there with the cars. And then he had to get video, which none of us had like really ever done before at that point, or very few of us had. And so it was like the perfect setup. And like because it's Jalopnik, we had to write about it because we had written about other people wrecking press cars.
Absolutely.
So like it would have been hypocritical for us not to write about it.
It's him in jail again. Like you gotta write about it.
You just like you have to do it. And so Patrick is like eating the most of anyone, and that's what it means to be a boss. Like if you're like a good reporter and a good like editor, like you just have to eat so much.
Who's the most commonly pissed off manufacturer that can't take a joke? Like who do you hear from the most?
I mean, look, it's
some of them have to have thick skin, right? They're like,
it depends,
whatever.
Chevy. Depending on who who is the PR person, Chevy, or like who the executive is, Chevy. Like it just, it's hard to say. Year to year, Chevy. It just depends, Chevy, so much.
Yeah.
Chevy,
Weird.
on who it is.
So we do a pass along question for each guest, and so yesterday we had lunch in Indy with NASCAR Chasm. And
my favorite.
Like Sean had never met him. I'm like, it's gonna be
Love
good.
that guy.
It's gonna be good.
Yeah.
We're just gonna be able to bullshit, and it's gonna be great.
I actually hate that guy.
Oh,
I-
he's all pissed off because he gets paid to tweet for NASCAR now.
Yeah,
That's his
that's
old
all he
job.
does.
That's all
Yeah.
I was doing now. He's like, damn it.
It's the smartest thing they've ever done.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely.
He's good. So his question was, what do you want to drive that you haven't got to yet?
Oh, I mean, currently as we speak, Patrick, I think, is driving a Ford Focus RS.
Oh, nice.
Around Austin in the run up to the F1 race.
Oh, sure.
That's
and
cool.
Yeah.
and I like my dream car. If I had like unlimited funds, like you give me $1 billion, the first car I would go out and buy is like a 94 to 96, probably 94 because it had the bigger turbo, or not the bigger turbo, it had the better suspension. A 94 Ford Escort RS Cosworth.
Yeah.
Like hands down.
Right. Is that the one with the big shelf wing?
Yes.
Yeah.
Right. And
Yep.
and they made a more comfortable version of it later on in the run because the homologation special essentially homologation special. So like they made a refined version of it, but I would want the most unrefined version of that car. And the Ford Focus RS is like I drove the prior version Ford Focus RS in the United States,
Okay.
which maybe like 10 people can say they have
Yeah.
who were outside Ford, because a dude who worked in Mexico, who had a company in Mexico but lived in Chicago, bought the car in Mexico because I feel so bad for Mexico. Ford of Mexico brought over 4 cars for
Yeah.
the 100th anniversary of Ford Mexico.
Okay.
And one of them was purchased by some gringo in Chicago who
Right.
just happened to have a license in Mexico because he did so much business there. So he was able to legally buy the car.
Yeah.
And he drove it to Austin and then flew the car to Chicago. And when he dropped in Austin, he was like, hey, I'm going to get barbecue. I'm a big fan of the site. If you want to come drive the car, you can have it for like half an hour while I eat barbecue. So like I stole the car for like half an hour,
Right.
and I loved that car. So
Yeah.
like I want to drive the new RS. Like if I had stupid money, I would definitely buy a new, like more so than a Ford GT.
Yeah.
Like that. Like I've driven a Veyron, Vitesse, like convertible. Like I've driven Lamborghinis, like Balboni, rear wheel drive, like all
Right.
sorts of crazy shit.
Yeah.
But like the weird little cars, because
Yeah.
like I'm a car pervert, are the things that appeal to me. So
Right.
definitely a Focus RS.
Yeah.
And then next to that, a Fiat 130 Coupe.
Our pass along question. Our next guest is Justin Marks. Justin Marks won the nationwide Xfinity whatever series race at Mid Ohio earlier this year. He's a former road racer. He owns the GoPro Motorplex go-kart track in Charlotte.
Yep.
And he's just like a longtime road racer and a good buddy of ours. If you have any question you could ask him, what would it be?
I think my question would be, like, if you're like a 13-year-old in this country and you know that you can probably race, like, like there's just like an inherent thing, and you've got the goods, like how do you, like, is it worth trying? Like, is it worth getting into motorsports knowing that the odds are so stacked against you? And like, because I honestly wonder about that, because I know people who are great drivers and great people, and like people I think should like be sponsored by everyone and like should have billions of dollars, and a lot of them aren't.
Right.
And it's just the circumstances of fate and timing and everything in motorsports. It's just so cruel.
Yeah.
Right.
Like, would you actually? Like, I wouldn't necessarily tell someone else to be a journalist. Like, I would say that,
Right.
be happier. Like, there are other your chances of success are
Yeah.
low, and your chances of misery are high.
Yeah.
Even if you do good work. Like, I don't know that I would tell someone else to do that. So I'm curious if other people would say, hey, get into motorsports knowing the odds are, like, even more so than being an actor, are just like, because you could be on like a national commercial and make money and no one knows who you are.
Right.
But like in motorsports, there's no corollary to that.
Yeah.
Like, there's nothing that, like, you can make a lot of money and be happy without being like either wildly successful or like maybe like a local pro kind of coach at
Yeah.
a track where you've got like a kind of sweet setup.
Yeah. Yeah, but that's a very small window. That's a possibility.
That's like 15 people.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, and even to get there is a
Exactly.
huge spend.
Average reach for a basic Jalopnik article.
Motorsports or just any Jalopnik
Any
article?
Jalopnik article.
Let's go both, actually. I'm curious. I'm curious on the comparison.
Well, I mean,
For better or
realistically,
worse, I'm curious. Yeah.
For an average Jalopnik article, through social and sideways and like all the crazy places that Jalopnik articles show up, an average Jalopnik article will probably be seen by 40,000 individual people.
Wow.
And that's taking out really like the crazy. There's an article right now that's like running, that's on the top of the big board, that like there are 2,000 people at this second reading one specific Jalopnik article, and it has like 300,000 uniques or something.
Yeah.
And those happen like pretty regularly.
Yeah.
Wow.
Taking out those and taking out because it's like average is like a weird thing. Like average like is skewed.
Such
So
a
it's like the
huge
average
variance,
Jalopnik post is like 70,000 or whatever it is.
Right.
Taking just the median Jalopnik post, like if you post something on Jalopnik that's not like hey, we redesigned the sidebar or whatever announcement post, like a real actual post, is probably 30 to 40,000,
Yeah.
which
What
is
about-
huge.
Yeah,
and motorsports.
absolutely.
Motor-
600?
It's
Motor-
fine. Yeah, you can have
680?
20 people.
I would say half, 15 to 20,
Yeah.
which still
yeah,
makes it the
still
biggest.
good.
Yeah, that's got to be.
Some months it's the biggest motorsports site without
Right.
trying
Yeah,
very. And
without-
Steph
without
does great
trying.
work, but like it's one person versus like
Yeah.
a website of people
Yeah.
will sometimes be the
Who are
biggest
reporting on
motorsports site
practice.
in the world
Right.
without like breaking the bank on staff.
I understand why traditional motorsports outlets haven't kind of let this out, but why have you guys never reported on the Johnny O'Connell attempting to murder Dario Franchitti story?
Yeah.
Did we not?
So you get to meet a lot of people, but the one thing I noticed about you in general is that you don't seem really fazed by anything. Have you met anybody that starstruck you? Like you were like, oh shit, that's Johnny O'Connell or somebody. You know?
In motorsports, no.
No, just anybody. In any, because like it does. Just every time I'm around you, your general demeanor doesn't seem to change depending on who's in the room. And I'm always into like I really like watching people and their like quirks and stuff. And I just every time I've been around you, it's the same like hey, what's up? You know, just like nothing seems to get you up or down. So I'm curious.
The only time I've been really thrown off, this is embarrassing because like most people, I don't know, everyone, if you accept that everyone sucks, like you're just much happier in life. Everyone's terrible. And if like everyone's terrible, then it's like no pressure. Like you
Yeah.
can just meet people where they are.
Yeah.
Like I'm terrible. Like I'm not a great we're having a karting race this weekend. Like people find out I'm a terrible driver.
Yeah.
Like I'm not even the best writer. Like, you know, I'm not even the best journalist. Like I suck at a lot of things, and like other people suck too. And if that's the case, then you can just be yourself. So it's like
Right.
low key. But I was at the old Gawker offices, and like I have a weird quirk. Like I'm a huge Houston Texans fan, which is already sad in and of itself because I'm from Texas and I'm from Houston. And, I'm a big. I like defense more than I like offense. Like
Okay.
I love like a really well-run defense. Like I think in football, given the especially now where like you have these like various like crazy offenses, and like you're not seeing a lot of wildcat in the NFL, but you're like seeing interesting plays. Like so like I'm sitting at my desk and I look over and there is like a defensive lineman who used to be now for the Eagles, but like it used to be for the Houston Texans, named Connor Barwin.
Okay.
And no one knows who Connor Barwin is.
No clue.
But I love good defense. He played on the same with J.J. Watt when J.J.
Okay.
Watt really came up. And, like,
Yeah.
J.J. Watt became famous, like, reasonably because J.J. Watt is, like, an amazing player. Like,
Yeah.
obviously the best defensive, maybe one of the best defensive players in the history of the NFL. But, like, Connor Barwin is, like, also for, like, a defensive lineman was, like, also excellent. That was just an amazing, like, front line, defensive line. And, like, he just happened to be there. And, like, it was so unexpected. It was like if a Martian just showed up in your race car at one point.
Right.
And I look over, and, like, honestly, the Deadspin guys admitted to me they didn't really know who he was. They cover sports, and he just showed up, they're vaguely aware.
Yeah.
And I look over at him, and I go, holy shit, Connor Barwin. And then he's, like, terrified, because he
Right.
looks over, and he's like, because no one's, like, on the street, like, holy shit, Connor Barwin.
Yeah. Right.
And he looks at me, and he's like, I don't know what to do. And it's like two handlers look at me, like, who is this weirdo?
Right. Get him out of here.
Right. And
Yeah.
I'm like, I have to explain myself. So I go on this long conversation, but like I'm like rambling.
It's getting worse.
And I'm like,
Yeah.
I am the only person in America with a Connor Barwin jersey. And then I'm like, I'll get a picture of it for you. So I text my wife to get a picture of it, and she takes it out and puts it on the bed, and the cat gets on it. And then so she sends me a picture.
yes.
And then I show him the picture, and there's like a cat on his Connor Barwin jersey.
Yeah.
And he's like, why do you have a cat on the jersey?
Yeah.
And then he's like freaked out, and I realized he's kind of weirded out. And so I'm like, I just have to walk away. And I'm like, well, I gotta get back to work. Great seeing you, whatever. And I like walk back to my desk, and I'm like, I'm writing, and I'm like, I have scared this person.
Right.
He was like in our office just doing a Q&A. And then at the end, he like, and like the backstory is he was in Houston, and he was like a great player, but he was also like a great. We both listened to indie music, and we had some like mutual like sort of acquaintances and
Right.
friends. And
You
so,
have
like,
a toothbrush at his.
yeah, I got a toothbrush in his place, but like we were in the same circles a little bit, and we went to a lot of the same shows, and like he was just there, and like he's like a very nice guy, and like he had to write like a letter, like he published in the Houston Press that was like, hey, I miss you, I love you guys, but like I gotta leave, like here's the thing,
Oh, that's cool.
because people in the like especially in the indie music like community that I was like very briefly like a part of, I like sort of embraced him, and like it was like a very nice thing. So like, but at the end of the day, before he left, he like walked over and had like signed like a card and he like signed it, and he like handed it to me, and I thought, oh, this is nice. Like the weirdness and the awkwardness is over.
It's over. We're
Right.
good here.
Like he
Oh,
gets
no.
it, and then he like looks at me, and just to clarify, so I did not like chase him or like try to get his phone number or something, he was like, they, pointing to our people, said I should give this to you, and then like he gives it to me and leaves, and I was like, oh. He thinks I'm a weirdo, like obsessive fan, and I'm just dead.
I was told to do this.
And I saw Kevin Spacey in the elevator at Bloomberg. I was like doing a TV hit.
Yeah.
I'm talking about like whatever GM or Tesla or something. And like my reaction to meeting people who I think are actually famous, who are like total weirdos, is like, "Holy shit, you're!" And I go, and he was like, coming out of the elevator, and I go, "Holy shit, you're Kevin Spacey!" And he goes, "Yes." And then he looked at me, and I didn't have a follow up, and I was just like, "Oh, you're in House of Cards. You're great." And he goes, "Thank you," and he just walks away.
That's it. Yeah.
And I was like, oh, and I got in the elevator and just like hated myself for a week.
What are the hours like here?
Crazy.
Yeah.
I mean, I work like a I get in a little early, leave a little early, like so my hours are much closer to a 9 to 5.
Sure.
But a lot of people are like 10 to 8 or work at home. Like you know, it's we try to keep relatively normal hours, but it's still the internet.
So a 10-ish hour day.
Yeah, I mean, the thing is, people work all the time.
Right. I
Because when you work on the internet,
putting out more so than the hours.
when you work on the internet, you always work. So there,
Right.
like, I've definitely been in situations, and there are definitely people who have situations where, like, there's no one from Jalopnik except for Kristen here right now. Is that like, we had somebody, Patrick was out, so it's like Balaban is like running the site, and then there's like news, and like the idea of getting in a train for an hour and like commuting into work, like you lose an hour of like very serious news coverage. So you just go screw it. But then what ends up happening is like you get up at like 8, and then you know take a lunch break, and it's like 6 o'clock at night, and you're like, I've been working all day.
Yeah.
Right.
And now that I don't do that anymore, now that I'm like, we've never talked about what my actual job is, which is like I'm an executive editor for the entire company.
Right.
Okay.
And I work on, you know, podcasting and video and all of this stuff. And
And that's for all of
all of the
Gizmodo?
websites,
Yeah,
all
Okay.
of Gizmodo
It's
Media.
not just Jalopnik.
No, my job is to take what we did at Jalopnik, which is like embrace other platforms and like expand what we do beyond just the written video or the written internet web page that you read to video and all sorts of strategic partnerships and all that, and apply that and help all the other websites do that. And that's like my job now. So I'm not in the like day-to-day grind of what's happening.
Yeah.
And every now and then I'll like go back, because I'm still like an editorial employee and I still write stuff every now and then. It's like to go back and help the website. It's like, oh, hey, we're shorthanded today. Can you come in and blog? And it's like, no, I can't. Man, like I haven't been doing this for like the last couple of months, and like trying to get back into the metabolism of like what it runs through. And it's like insane. Like the amount of work is nuts. Like there was a person who worked for a very prominent car magazine who came to work for the website and quit after 3 days because it was too much work.
Right.
It was too hard.
Right.
And they just couldn't believe that we like actually worked this hard.
Yeah.
And it's like that for like, if you want to be successful, like the part of our advantage is that other people go to bed and other people don't work weekends, and other people won't get up at 3 o'clock in the morning and like blog out a story if there's a big story. And like to us, it's unconscionable to not do that, because it's not 1986. People don't wake up in the morning and read the newspaper, so you just need to get it in before deadline. Like if it's news and it's happening now, it is our duty, and our audience expects, you know, to get that information.
Right.
And so that's where we are.
Now, if there's one thing we know about this podcast, is that Scott Atherton at IMSA, Mark Miles at IndyCar, Brian France at NASCAR, Chip Pankow at GRC, they're all huge fans of our podcast.
Right.
They all listen very closely. So as the guy who's actually able to reach the audience that somehow motorsports can't reach, there's no magic wand, there's no one thing, but what can we do to engage better?
There is a magic wand. Brian, if you're listening, Scott, I met Scott a few times, very nice guy. He's like he's like a vice principal, high school vice principal, like everyone's favorite high school vice
Excellent
principal.
politician.
Like, you know, if there's one thing you can do, and Ryan's a good exemplar of this, and other people are as well, is just like let your drivers be human beings, man.
Oh, weird.
Like,
Are you
we have
you're talking to Scott about this?
we have an off-air story for you.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean it's nonsense that like the most interesting NASCAR, like the only time like, NASCAR drivers are interesting is if they screw up.
Yeah.
And the only time they screw up is when they are like human beings.
Right.
And like I've had the pleasure of listening to Smoke himself like go off. Like I have to be careful because there are things that are like obviously off the record, but like I've had the pleasure of listening to Tony Stewart talk to like NASCAR comms people, like off the record, and like talk about like and be like a human being,
right?
And like NASCAR even to this day still like has a problem with dealing with Tony Stewart and like who he is,
Right.
But like for all of
Even
the
though
like
he's such a fan favorite for being exactly that
yeah,
guy.
yeah, and it's not like he's like, oh, I'm politically incorrect, and like whatever. They're like things. I don't think Tony Stewart and I agree on most things.
Sure.
But like he is a human being, and he acts as himself, and they cannot deal with that. Whereas you have a bunch of like cardboard cookie cutter drivers
Yep.
who are just safe enough and they don't let them be. Like, let's be honest, like Menard, like the Menard family are crazy. Like they're like an anti-union, like they are crazy people.
Okay.
Yeah.
And like honestly, I would actually rather be okay with them just being crazy and having
hearing
their
all that
crazy
stuff,
beliefs
yeah.
and hearing all of it,
Yeah.
and then making judgments than like, oh, we're friendly and this and the, like blah 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 blah.
Right.
Like, come we drive a car and we had a good week and our crew chief and thank God for Tide Racing and all this
Yeah.
shit. And it's like no, just let them be human beings. Like old school Cale Yarborough.
Yeah.
Like I want to see people get in fights.
Yeah.
Like, but they're not going to do it.
Yeah.
Right.
Like they're not. Like the thing that gets the money are big corporations and targets, although maybe not Target anymore,
not
but
anymore.
like big corporations, and like they get funded and they like to even beg for money, like they have to provide a certain level of safety. And to let human beings be human beings is antithetical to that, and so they're never going to do it. But at the same time, it's what's eroding their fan base.
Right.
And so eventually, they're going to be left with this shell of what they were, and just the littlest tap is it's all going to collapse. And they're going
Yeah.
to have to rebuild, and I'm going to be rooting for that collapse.
Well, and on that note, what's made Jalopnik succeed has been that you found your own voice and your own place in this marketplace with not doing what everybody else was doing. And I think that could easily apply to personalities in racing, teams in racing,
Yeah.
branding in racing.
We need to go.
We do. Well, you did.
'Cause Matt
Matt's
needs to
gotta
go.
Yeah, exactly.
So
I would say
Continental's-
pizzas on Continental.
pizza's on Continental.
Yeah.
All right.
I'm finished.
Wow, that was such a great episode. That guest really knew how to tell a story.
Did you like that, Matt Hardigree? Ryan, who's sitting here next to me.
You're welcome, Sean. I'm right here.
Very good. All right, thank you to Matt Hardigree, who once again gave us the time. Actually, in all credit to Matt, we were running so behind trying to get from Pennsylvania to New York. He actually skipped his first train to get home and took the next one because he wanted to spend time with us. And as sort of a new father, everybody would know time at home is very valuable. And so we really, really appreciate him sort of setting time aside and making it work for us. So all credit to him. Be sure to check out jalopnik.com. I don't know why you wouldn't be already. But anyway, in honor of fairly new father, Matt Hardigree, we're going to go back to a band that I'm a big fan of called Earthworm Ensemble. And you can find them on iTunes. Here's an awesome song of theirs called The Traveling Train. Enjoy.
If you're looking real close, you can see the engineer.
See the engineer. You're looking real close. You can see the engineer.
He's a gray locomotive on the railway.
Gray locomotive. He's a gray locomotive on the railway.
Passing farms with windmills and tractors pulling hay bales.
Passing farms with windmills and tractors pulling hay bales.
Boxcars are heavy with their cargo. Apples, tangerines, walnuts, watermelon, oranges, avocados, grapes, apricots, kumquats, plums, and peaches, nectarines, cantaloupe, honeydew, kiwi, lemons, peanuts, broccoli, cashew, strawberry, cranberry, blueberry, elderberry, gooseberry, blackberry, appleberry, huckleberry, mulberry, cucumber, chestnut.
Occasionally passion fruit.
Cannonball is winding through the mountains.
Cannonball is winding through the mountain.
Rolling over bridges and steaming through the tunnels. Rolling, steaming, coffee shop, town hall, town square, local barber, drugstore, parking lot, high school, playground, neighborhood, Elks Lodge, cemetery, golf course, ball field, bus stop, fitness center, bowling alley, movie house. Sun sets low behind the mountain.
Sun sets low behind the mountain.
Soon our journey ends as we're nearing the station. End of the line.